Hello, I'm David Myron, Associate Director of Content for Digital Events at Cyber Risk Alliance. Welcome to today's Threat Intelligence e-Summit and this presentation titled Lights, Camera, Action, Tackling Threat Intelligence at Scale, sponsored by Bandura Cyber. Delivering today's insights will be Todd Weller, Chief Strategy Officer at Bandura Cyber. Todd is responsible for driving corporate, product, and go-to-market strategy and execution across multiple areas, including corporate development, marketing, product management, and strategic alliances and partnerships. Todd has over 20 years of cybersecurity industry experience with a unique blend of operational and Wall Street experience. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you'd like to ask any questions, just select the Q&A button below. If you're interested in accessing today's slides, just select the Handouts button below. Also, a recording of today's presentation will be made available on demand once the virtual conference concludes. With that, it's time to kick things off. Todd, welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks, David. Very excited to be here and participating in the SE Media two-day e-Summit. I think what we're going to talk about today really fits into the theme around building a program that turns data into action, and we're going to drill a lot into some of the challenges around taking action. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to talk about a few things today. The first is the importance of multi-source threat intelligence. We're going to talk about the what, the why, and the how. Then we're going to look at the scale challenges with today's threat intelligence model, and specifically when it comes to taking action. Finally, we'll look at how organizations can overcome these challenges and make threat intelligence actionable in a simple and scalable way. Importantly, you're not just going to hear the perspectives from Bandura today, but we also pulled one of our customers. So I'm also going to give you the perspectives from the Chief Security Officer of one of our financial services customers. So I always like to baseline these discussions around threat intelligence. What is it? Sometimes it's a nebulous term to folks, especially with security marketing and every vendor saying they use it. Oftentimes from a definitional perspective, you'll see the Gartner definition, and that is a great definition. But I also look for others, and these are two of my current favorites. The first is from the SANS Institute. They define it as a set of data collected, assessed, and applied with regard to threats, actors, exploits, malware vulnerabilities, and indicators of compromise. I also love Recorded Futures definition because it's very simple and to the point. Threat intelligence is knowledge that allows you to prevent or mitigate cyber attacks. The commonality between these definitions is really the importance of doing something with threat intelligence, applying it, taking action, actually using it to help you with security, preventing threats, detecting, and responding to threats. Action is the critical piece. We're definitely seeing more organizations use multi-source threat intelligence as part of their security efforts. This is threat intelligence that goes beyond what they're getting in their existing security controls. The great news is there's lots of threat intelligence out there. There's commercial specialists, some of which you will have heard from or are going to hear from at this summit, folks like Intel 471 and Insights, and other commercial providers like Domain Tools, Recorded Future, and WebRoot. There's also great sources of threat intelligence that are on open source, like blocklist.de, SIN's Army List, to name a few. Government is a great source of threat intelligence. From the federal perspective with DHS, but there's also some, I think, lesser known sources like State of Missouri SOC. And then industry threat intelligence is clearly critical, right? Lots of ISACs like FSISAC and Health ISAC that are well known. But there's also some other regional efforts which are very interesting. For example, Texas Bankers Association recently launched their own ISAO for their members. Last but not least, there's threat intelligence that's internal to the organization. That's data you're generating from your existing security controls and other systems. The important point is there's lots of threat intelligence and you need to use kind of these multiple sources. So why are organizations doing this? So the first baseline reason is that attacks continue to happen. And these are just a few examples to highlight this, right? Showing kind of financial services continues to be in the crosshairs with 2/3 of financial services firms suffering an attack in the past year. Healthcare continues to be an attractive target. And then the latest, which everybody is aware of, is Colonial Pipeline. And if you're on the East Coast like I am, you're actually seeing the aftermath of that ransomware attack with respect to higher gas prices, long gas lines, and in some cases, gas stations that are out of gas. So threats are real and they keep coming. Another reason folks are turning to threat intelligence is because that blocking known threats at scale using traditional network security controls has become increasingly challenging. There's a lot of things going on here. First, there's just growing threat volumes. There's a lot more encrypted traffic. And then firewalls also are doing 8 million different things these days. But a critical issue here is that the way they detect and block threats is using closed and proprietary threat intelligence. This is threat intelligence that's really unique and proprietary to the vendor. They're looking at the activity happening throughout their large customer bases. They detect threats and then develop signatures to block those threats. This threat intelligence has significant value, but it alone is insufficient because it's just one vendor's view of the threat landscape. That's why it's important to have kind of a broader view. Another issue with this threat intelligence is that it's largely closed. You can't really take this threat intelligence out of an existing control like a firewall and apply it somewhere else. And while we're going to talk a lot today around network security and next-gen firewalls, this problem exists with lots of existing security controls. So the same issues we'll talk about exist with respect to endpoint security, for example. Another reason organizations are turning to threat intelligence is that there's tangible benefits to doing so. This is data from Recorded Future, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but I think there's some real interesting data points here. For example, with threat intelligence, organizations are able to identify threats earlier, a 10x improvement there. They're able to resolve those threats faster by 63%. 22% more security threats are being identified before impact. What's also interesting is that there's some real efficiency benefits, as you can see there too, including less time spent compiling security reports. Also less time dealing with alerts. By proactively blocking with threat intelligence, there's less alerts. By using threat intelligence to correlate with your alerts, you can better prioritize. The bottom line is there's real benefits and ROI to threat intelligence, which is another reason organizations are increasing their use of it. So now I want to turn to some perspectives from the Chief Security Officer of our customer. Again, it's a mid-sized financial services organization, and we asked them several questions. First, what types of threat intel are you using? And what you'll see here is really kind of an evolution, as threat intelligence is often a journey for organizations. So they began by manually gathering a lot of data, focused on open source, set up some Google alerts, and then monitored announcements from the government, from CISA, from the DHS, from FBI. Again, a lot of this was manually gathered, manually actioned. Then they were looking at the threat intelligence they were getting from their existing security controls, like Proofpoint on the email side, Sophos for the endpoint, and then they outsourced their security monitoring to SecureWorks as a managed security service provider. So all that provided great threat intelligence, but then they kind of continued their evolution to expand to using broader multi-source threat intelligence and leveraging automation to be able to ingest this intelligence and to use it to proactively block threats as well as to automatically respond. And you can see some of the capabilities they're using, but it's a mix of commercial threat feeds, open source, the ISAC threat intelligence, and other sources. We then looked at how they're using it. And so again, here you're going to see kind of process stuff. They're gathering data from multiple sources. They're looking at their tools. Once you get that data, they're analyzing it and correlating that, looking at themes. They're hypothesizing on the themes and speculating on the outcomes. And then they're looking to defend against those outcomes. So some pretty progressive stuff here. Part of this is manually blocking indicators of compromise from threats they discover. Part of it is proactively and automatically blocking based on threat intel feeds and other tools. And they've definitely become a big proponent of automating threat response. That's taking threat intelligence and rapidly and automatically responding to threats. The last thing we asked them here was why are you using threat intel? And the three key reasons were, first, they could fingerprint threat actors with specific intent, get a better understanding of tactics, techniques, and procedures and the assets they were focused on so that this organization could aggressively defend against those. They're looking to do automated threat response for this malicious activity. So a lot of focus on preventing malicious traffic from landing or escaping the network in real time. And then they're also able to eliminate noisy traffic. And this is creating a lot of efficiency for their teams. So whether that's less kind of alerts to focus on or downstream to their other security controls, being able to have them focus on a cleaner amount of traffic and to do their jobs better. So as organizations are increasing their use of threat intelligence, this opens up a whole new host of other challenges. For example, challenges deploying threat intelligence. You need to automate it because there's still a lot of manual processes and work that's involved. And you need to be able to apply it everywhere data and users are. I mean, today networks consist of on-prem networks, cloud networks. In cloud, we got multi-cloud as organizations are often using a mix of AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform. And then, of course, as we've all seen the last year, the significant increase in remote users coming from networks you don't control, whether that's a home network or from a Starbucks or some other remote site. So you need to be able to apply this everywhere. One of the issues with today's threat intelligence model is it doesn't scale. And there's three main issues here. First, there's just too much data. There is an overwhelming amount of threat intelligence data that exists. Second, it's too resource intensive. Threat intelligence data can be very expensive. It can require a large security team to be able to acquire the data, analyze it, use it effectively. And then oftentimes you need other tools to help you with that, like a threat intelligence platform or a source system. The third issue is a limited ability to take action. And that's because existing security controls have significant limitations when it comes to using third-party threat intelligence. Another point here is that a lot of action today is too reactive. For example, a lot of organizations are integrating threat intelligence data into their SIMs to help and correlating that against alerts to help them prioritize which alerts to focus on. This has significant value. However, it is reactive. It takes a lot of time to do that, and so you're kind of behind. So trying to be more proactive with threat intel is important. But again, your existing security controls don't make that easy. What these scale issues bring about are two big issues. First, you have large enterprises who have been the primary adopters of threat intelligence to date. They've spent a lot of money, and they still can't deploy threat intelligence at scale. And then you have small and mid-sized enterprises that need threat intelligence just as much as the large enterprises, but they don't have nearly the resources to be able to deploy it. So small and mid-sized enterprises are lucky if they can be able to deploy threat intelligence at all. So these are really the scale issues with today's threat intelligence model. So if we dig deeper on the taking action piece, this remains a key challenge. This is information from the Palo Alto Network's Cortex XSOAR team. This was based on a presentation called A Radical New Approach to Threat Intel Management, where they highlighted a lack of action remains a key reason why threat intel programs struggle. Putting threat intelligence into action is manual, repetitive, and cumbersome. And that scalable enforcement is one of the missing pieces of an incomplete threat intelligence management puzzle. So again, taking action is critical, and there's significant challenges on this front. It comes back to the challenges with existing security controls. And here we'll focus on next generation firewalls. And the key point is they don't play nicely with third-party threat intelligence. There's significant limitations as far as the volume of indicators they can support. There's also limits as far as the number of threat lists you can have and the size of lists. There are also limits as far as how you can get threat intelligence data into these systems. Again, kind of that closed concept we talked about earlier. It's just very limited in terms of how you can get third-party data into a firewall. To put some context behind this, here's some real-world data. This is data from a leading next-gen firewall provider. You can see on the top, these are limits with respect to external block lists. You can see on the IP side that a low-end firewall can handle a maximum of 50,000 indicators. Mid-range and high-end is 150,000. On the domain side, it goes from 50,000 up to 4 million. And when we're talking high-end here, we're talking firewalls that are the size of refrigerators that are being used by large service providers and very large enterprises. To put that in context, on the bottom is data from a few threat feeds. The first is a commercial IP reputation feed. You can see there's over 4.5 million indicators on that threat feed. The second is a malicious domain block list. This is from a commercial DNS threat intelligence provider. And these are domains that they risk score 99 out of 100. So this is just a subset of domains on their threat feed. And you can see that it's over 11 million indicators. Clearly, there's no way to get this into a next generation firewall given the constraints you see above. These limits then lead to other downstream issues. The first is increased time spent managing firewall block lists, because these lists are constantly changing, and you as an organization need to manage the threat intel you're putting into your firewall to operate within the constraints of the firewall. There's also block list curation issues. For example, lots of organizations have to age out indicators more rapidly than they want to operate within those constraints. Then there's never-ending cycles here, because threat intelligence is dynamic and constantly changing. So you're this never-ending cycle of, we've identified this IP or domain as bad, then we need to go get it blocked. And that brings into play things like change control with firewalls that can take time. Ultimately, you're not getting a full ROI on your threat intelligence data investment, and that's a key issue. As we talked about, threat intel is dynamic, and this just worsens those problems. And this is a great example of that. This is an open source threat feed. It's the DShield Threat Persistence Top 1000. Here you can see, from an indicator perspective, that 73% of the indicators on this threat list were on 7 days or less. And actually 66% were on 1 day or less. Again, these are rapidly changing. Threat intelligence is dynamic. An IP that's bad today, bad right now, might be deemed good in a few minutes. So constant change just worsens these problems. So again, turning to our chief security officer from our customer, we asked, what are the threat intelligence challenges that you're facing? First point he mentioned was, distilling all this data down to something that's useful and actionable, really turning it into actionable threat intelligence. The second was really around how they deal with false positives. And third relates to these kind of limitations with existing security controls. And they're a big believer that the threat intel response layer should be separate layer from their firewall. And the reasons for that is they believe that firewalls, are designed for stateful inspection, not volumetric malicious packet dropping. That whole change management process, that doesn't really align well with the need to kind of take rapid action to threats, rapid threat response. And then complexity in firewall access control lists shouldn't be increased by threat intelligence response rules and activity. So now I'd like to just spend a few minutes on kind of where Bandura fits and how we're really helping to kind of tackle these threat intelligence scale challenges that we talked about. We are the easiest and best way to deploy threat intelligence at scale. Basically, we're able to block known bad traffic using large volumes of third-party threat intelligence data. We like to talk about these words on the right because they speak to kind of key points of value, key differentiators we've heard over and over again from our customers. SMART reflects the fact that we use lots and lots of threat intelligence. As we said at the outset, there's lots of great threat intelligence data that's out there, commercial, open source, industry, government. Organizations should be able to use the threat intelligence they want from any source. In fact, at Bandura, we don't even produce our own threat intelligence. Our strategy is to be completely open and to partner with all the third-party threat intelligence data providers that are out there. Simple is everything about what we've done, how the platform works, deploying it, managing it, but really at a high level, we've made threat intelligence simple for small and mid-sized organizations. We've really packaged it together in a way they can consume. Scalable is the ability to block at scale, right? It's the ability to block up to 150 million IP and domain indicators, which far exceeds what any firewall can do. And everywhere, as we talked about earlier, is you need to be able to do this, whether it's an on-prem network, whether it's in the cloud, whether that's AWS, Azure, or Google, or to a remote network. And that's where we're driving to. Digging just a little bit deeper in terms of what we do, we partnered with threat intel providers to provide best-in-class threat intelligence data out of the box. So we're providing tens of millions of IP and domain threat intelligence indicators. Some of our partnerships include commercial providers like Domain Tools, Proofpoint, Webroot. We also are providing open source feeds, government sources like DHS. And then for industry, for our customers that are members of ISACs and ISAOs, we make it very easy for them to be able to pull that data into the platform. The way the platform works is we have a cloud-based component where we're aggregating, integrating, and curating all this threat intelligence. Again, that's the threat intelligence we're providing, but we make it very easy for customers to bring in threat intelligence from any source. And we do that by building integrations. Today we have 50, and that continues to grow. And then finally, it's that action piece. It's deploying and enforcing. So our cloud-based service will deploy threat intelligence and simple policies to our threat blockers. They sit inline on a network, typically in front of a firewall, and they're looking at the inbound and the outbound traffic and making an allow or deny decision based off of all this threat intelligence. And again, it's important that you can do this to protect any network. So again, turning back to our CISO, how we use Bandura. First thing they do is reduce their attack surface by geo-blocking and eliminating, traffic that has no business being on their network. And they view this as, eliminating a lot of noise that doesn't need to be dealt with. And then they're using all the threat intelligence feeds we're providing, but they're augmenting that with their own sources of threat intelligence. They're using it to do active defense based on threats that they become aware of, to do real-time automated threat response very rapidly. And they're also doing proactive threat hunting, which is very progressive and sophisticated. So that's how a customer is really using Bandura. And as far as the benefits, again, they view this as a very effective automated risk reduction layer that's external to their other network security controls. They're blocking millions of malicious packets a day. They're seeing and blocking landed command and control ransomware traffic. And then noise reduction is a critical factor, right? They're able to use threat intelligence to block no noisy threats, eliminating a lot of junk traffic that otherwise their firewalls and IPS would have to deal with. So now firewalls and IPS are dealing with cleaner traffic, getting a clearer view. And you can see there a great data point that they've decreased their IPS event investigations by more than 50%. And again, that ability to take rapid response to threats is kind of a key benefit. So at the end of the day, our focus is really helping organizations tackle these TI scale challenges we talked about. As we mentioned, small and mid-sized enterprises need threat intelligence, but they don't have the resources. And so we've packaged this together for them, data, automated management, action, all into a form factor that they can consume. And so kind of democratizing threat intelligence, bringing it to the masses. And then for the large enterprises that have, already made significant investments, we're really helping them to do the enforcement piece, helping them to be proactive with threat intelligence at a scale they can't do with their firewalls, and then also enabling that rapid and automated response in a more rapid fashion than they can do with their firewalls, because they don't have to go through all that change control type stuff. So in each case, we're adding significant value to help tackle those scale problems we talked about with the TI model. So to summarize, more organizations are using multi-source threat intelligence because it's helping them to better prevent, detect, and respond to threats. We talked about the threat intel model scale challenges that both large enterprises and small and mid-sized face. We dug a bit deeper into the problem and challenges around taking action, which really is driven by limitations that existing security controls have when it comes to using threat intelligence. There's still a lot of manual and time-consuming processes, and all this is exacerbated by the dynamic nature of threat intel. And then we looked at ways that Bandura is helping organizations of all sizes overcome these challenges. So I want to thank you all for participating. I know we're going to open it up to some questions. While we're polling for questions, encourage you for more information, visit our website, banduracyber.com. You'll find some great resources there. There's a white paper that digs deeper into the threat intelligence challenges with next generation firewalls. There's some great blogs like our scalable enforcement with threat intelligence, and you can sign up for our newsletter.
All right, great. Thank you, Todd, for that informative presentation. As a reminder to our viewers, if you have a question for Todd, just select the Q&A button at the bottom of the console. If we're not able to answer your question during the show, you'll receive an email response to it within a few days. Okay, so it looks like we have some questions coming in from the audience, so let's begin our Q&A session. Our first question is, how do you deal with the issue of false positives when it comes to blocking with threat intelligence?
That's a great question. So there's a couple angles to that. So first of all, part of it is the threat intelligence vendors, right, that we use. We've done a lot of vetting on them. So high quality data is important at the outset. That said, you're always going to have some sort of false positives to deal with. And so there's a couple mechanisms to deal with that. One is to use concepts like risk scoring or risk thresholds to control what you want to block, right? And you can use those dynamically. For example, we have categorized and scored IP indicators from 1 to 100. You can set your blocking threshold. A lot of customers start at 90 and higher, but you can adjust that. If you want to get more conservative, you could go and only block indicators that are 99 and higher. If you want to get more aggressive, you go lower. So that's a mechanism to control how you block. The other thing that becomes really important is, while block lists are important, being able to automatically allow traffic is equally important. And that can be proactive by having kind of automated lists of known good IP addresses and domains, or it could be reactive as far as adding things rapidly to an allowed list. So those are the mechanisms at which you would handle false positives.
All right, another question for you. What about the challenge of deploying threat intelligence to protect applications in the cloud and remote users?
That's another great question. Let's separate those into two. So as you look at cloud, the same problems exist in cloud that exist in on-prem, right? There's threat actors are targeting your cloud environments. A lot of those cloud environments are wide open. Some of the differences are, you have native security controls out there from the cloud providers, but you'll find they have the same kind of threat intel limitations that an on-prem firewall will have, for example. And so the same problem exists out there. What makes that problem even worse is kind of what we talked about earlier, which is the world is just not cloud, right? You have to protect your on-prem environment, you have to protect your cloud, and you have to protect multiple clouds. And so while some organizations start with going down the route of, I'm going to use native AWS security controls, you can't use those on-prem, and you can't use those in other clouds. And so kind of being able to have a solution that scales both is critical. But again, you'll run into the same challenges if you try to put threat feeds into a virtual firewall in AWS, for example. On the remote side, right, that becomes challenging because you don't control the networks they're coming from. And so there your option is to do something either kind of on the endpoint, although again, you're not going to find many approaches where you can put a lot of third-party indicators. Our approach to that has been, look, you have to have an as-a-service type play where that remote user's traffic is redirected through a cloud-based service, which is using that threat intelligence out there to protect the user.
All right, next question. Would you consider Bandura to be a threat intelligence platform?
We get that a lot, honestly, and there's a little bit of overlap, but the answer is no. So threat intelligence platforms aggregate a lot of threat feeds that you've already had. They do a lot of analytics. They let you do prioritization, scoring, and then they help you kind of deploy that to controls to take action. They've predominantly been used by very large enterprises that have dedicated threat intel teams, SOCs, and so we don't really have all the feature function that a threat intelligence platform has. So for the large enterprise customer, we really are the action piece, and we have out-of-the-box integrations, and we have partnerships with all the threat intelligence platform providers. So Anomaly, Insights, Threat Quotient, Threat Connect, we're partners with them there. Now, when you get down to small and mid-sized enterprises, again, they don't have significant resources. They don't have the ability to go out and get lots of threat data, and threat intelligence platforms are going to be on their scope. So for those customers, we very much are their threat intelligence solution, and we are kind of have good enough aspects of a tip where we're doing the aggregation of the feeds, having them automatically updated, and then deploying them. So for that customer base, but again, that customer is never going to have the resources to go out and get a full-fledged threat intelligence platform from those great providers I mentioned.
Thank you, Todd. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions. Right now, we welcome you to visit the Virtual Expo Hall, where you can continue the conversation with the team at Bandura Cyber. Thank you again to Todd and Bandura Cyber for being with us today and sharing all that great information. And of course, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the presentation.